Welcome back, students. In this lecture, we're going to stop talking about spatial databases and we're going to actually install one. And as I mentioned several times, the spatial database that we're going to work with in this course is called PostGIS. I think it's probably one of the best ones out there. It's open source, it's free, it conforms to most of the Open Geospatial Consortium standards. And so that's what we're going to use. But PostGIS is actually an extension to the PostgreSQL database, so we're going to have to install that one first. So I'm going to open my web browser. I'm going to use Chrome, and I'm just going to enter PostgreSQL into Google to search for it. And the first thing that comes up is this www.postgresql.org. And I'm going to go straight to Downloads. Now I'm going to install this on a Windows system. I'm using Windows 10. Unfortunately, I don't have a Mac available or any of these Linux distributions available. So if you're using one of those, you're going to have to kind of step through it on your own. But I assume if you're familiar enough with computers to be taking a class on spatial databases, you should be familiar enough to read this documentation and install your own software. So I'm going to go straight to Windows. I want to download the installer that's certified by EnterpriseDB for all supported PostgreSQL versions. Because this particular installer has a package manager called Stack Builder that will allow us to install PostGIS very simply. So I'm going to click this, and select my version. I'm going to go with 10.1. That's the newest version. And I know that one works with the newest version of QGIS and the newest version of PostGIS, so we might as well go with it. My operating system is Windows 64-bit. Then we'll click Download Now. I'm actually not going to click Download Now because I've already downloaded it. I don't think you want to sit there and wait for 10 minutes while it downloads. So I'm going to go straight to my Windows Downloads directory and come down here to the file that I downloaded yesterday. It's PostgreSQL 10.1 Windows x64. So I'm going to click on that. Windows is going to ask me if I give it permission to actually install something, and I do. And now it's installing some stuff. Looks like it's installing some Microsoft libraries. And then we get to the PostgreSQL Setup Wizard. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to leave the installation directory in its default location. So I'm just going to click Next again. And then I want to install all these. PostgreSQL Server is the database software. Admin 4 is the graphical user interface that will allow us to work with the database. And Stack Builder, as I said, is this packet manager that allows us to install extensions to PostgreSQL. And then the command line tools, we'll talk about those a little bit, but we won't be using those very much. But it's good to have. There's some really useful things that you can do from the command line, especially with regards to backing up and things like that. So I'm going to click Next, and then it's going to ask me for a password. And this is the password for the database superuser. And the name of the database superuser is Postgres. So you want to make sure that this is a password that you're not going to forget. If you forget it, there's no way to retrieve it, and you might end up having to reinstall the software. So whatever you use for your password, write it down, save it someplace in a secure location, put it in a safe or something, and then it's going to ask us to retype it, just to make sure we didn't make any mistakes. And then Next. It's going to ask us to select the port number that the server is going to listen to, and the default port for PostgreSQL is 5432. I'd recommend you keeping that unless you have another version of PostgreSQL that's also listening on that port, or some other software that you know is listening on that port. So I'm just going to accept the default, click Next. And here's some advanced options that we're just going to accept the defaults for us, so I'll click Next again. This shows a list of the settings, mostly installation directories and that kind of thing. It's basically all the information that we've just entered. So you might want to take a screenshot of that just so you don't ever lose it. And then we'll click Next and Next again. And now it's going to install. Okay, PostgreSQL has finished installing. Now it's asking me if I want to launch Stack Builder after I exit. And it tells us that Stack Builder may be used to download and install additional tools, drivers, and applications to complement your PostgreSQL installation. And I want to do this, so I'm going to leave this box checked. because Stack Builder is going to let us install PostGIS. So I'll click Finish, and then it launches Stack Builder automatically. And if for some reason you didn't get to this screen, or missed the option to launch Stack Builder automatically, you can just come down here and search for Stack Builder, and it comes right up. So it's asking me to select the installation that I'm installing software for from the list. And again, this is in case I might have multiple versions of PostgreSQL on my computer. In this case, I only have one, and that's version 10. So I'm going to select that. I'll click Next. And then it's showing some categories that I might like to install. I'm going to go straight to Spatial Extensions. I'm going to click the PostGIS 2.4 bundle. You can look through some of these other ones if you want, but probably there's nothing else you're going to want to add. You could potentially add some database drivers in case you want to access your PostGIS data through something like Excel or Access, but I'm going to show you how to do that a little bit later on in the course. So I'm going to click Next. It's asking me for a download directory. I'm going to accept the default. Click Next again, and it tells me that all the installation files have been downloaded. So I'll click Next again, and it's going to install all the software for PostGIS, and actually several extensions and other pieces of software that PostGIS uses as well. So I'll click Next. It asks me to agree to the license agreement, so I'll click I agree. Now it's asking me to choose the components. Of course, I want PostGIS. It also has the option to create a spatial database, and if you click that, it will automatically create a database in your PostgreSQL instance that includes PostGIS extensions. But I'm not going to click this because I'm going to show you how to do that through PGAdmin 4. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. I'll leave PostGIS checked and click Next. And again, I'll accept the default destination folder. So it asks if we want it to register the GDAL data environmental variable, and I'm going to click yes. That's just going to set a variable in the operating system to make the GDAL software accessible by PostGIS. So I'm going to click yes. It asks us again about enabling raster drivers, and again we want to click yes to enable those drivers. And another one, this one enables the output, so it'll allow us to save the output rasters that are stored in PostGIS to an external file. At least I believe that's what it does. We're going to click yes to that one as well. And finally close. And finish. And there it is. We've just installed PostgreSQL and we've installed PostGIS. I'm going to search here for PGAdmin 4. That's the graphical user interface that allows us to manage our non-spatial data. And so I'm going to click that to run it. So this is what the opening page of PGAdmin 4 looks like. I'm going to come over here to this Servers button over here in our browser. I'm going to right click on it and create a new connection to a server. And I'm just going to give it a name, PSQL version 10.1. Then I'm going to go in under connection and I have to give it a host. So that's going to be localhost. It asks for a port, the name of the maintenance database, which we'll talk about later. We'll leave it as it is, Postgres for now. The username Postgres, remember that's the super user. So we have to then put in the password that we created for the super user. And I'm going to click Save Password. You can decide for yourself whether you want to do that or not. If you're concerned about security, you may not want to do that, but then you'll have to enter the password every time you connect to the server. So it's up to you. So I'll click Save, and now I have a connection to the server. So if I expand that, come down, I see I have a couple objects already in the server connection. One is called Databases, and it's got one already called Postgres. That's what it's going to use for maintenance operations. But we're going to add another one, so I'm going to right-click on Databases, and again I'll go to Create Database, and the database that I create, I'm going to call it SDB for Spatial Database _ course. And this is a database that we'll be using throughout this course. When you start using your own data, you'll probably want to create a separate database for it. So I'm going to leave the owner as Postgres. Again, that's a super user. That's the only user we have in the system right now. And one thing you'll always see in PGAdmin 4 is that all these dialog boxes will have a SQL tab. If you click that SQL tab, you'll see the actual SQL that it's sending to PostgreSQL to create this database. So all this graphical user interface is doing is collecting data that it's using to create a SQL statement, because the only thing that the database understands is SQL. So I'll click Save, and now we see we have another database in here. One thing that I'm going to recommend right now is that you use all lowercase letters when you name your database. All lowercase and underscores instead of spaces. I think your life will be a whole lot easier if you do it that way. Now, a couple things that I want to look at in here. One is under extensions. If I expand that, see it has one extension, this PGSQL, and that's the procedural language that allows you to write SQL functions in PostgreSQL. And then the other thing we want to look at is schemas. And we only have one schema in here. It's called public. If we look inside public, we have a bunch of other objects in this Object Explorer. And one thing I want to look at is functions. And right now, when I expand that, nothing happens. We don't have any functions in here at all. And I also want to look at tables. Again, nothing happens here. We don't have any tables. And what all of this is telling me, and you'll see how it changes, is that this database that we just created, SDB course, is not spatially enabled. And so we're going to add PostGIS to this SDB course database, and then we'll look again at some of these things and we'll see how they changed. So I'm going to write a SQL statement against this SDB course. Remember, SQL is the only thing that the database understands. So everything that we're going to do with the database, we need to write as a SQL statement, or use a graphical user interface that creates a SQL statement for us. But we're going to use SQL directly. So to write our own SQL statement, we need to come up here to the Tools menu and click on the Query tool. And this gives us an editor that we can write SQL, and it also gives us some tabs here to look at the output and some other things. We'll look at some of these other tabs as we make our way through the course. But for right now, all I'm going to do is write the SQL statement, create the extension, and then PostGIS. And then I'm going to click this lightning bolt arrow. That's what I use to execute the SQL statement that I just wrote. And it says query returned successfully in 11 seconds. That's good. There's no data output or anything like that. And so now I'm going to right click on this SDB course again. I'm going to click refresh. And now that I've refreshed, if I expand extensions, see now we have two. And one of them is PostGIS. So that tells us that we installed PostGIS successfully. And we can double check that again by looking at the schema, going to the public schema, and this time when I expand functions, guess what? I've got over 1,000 of them. 1,174 to be exact. And these are the functions that make up PostGIS. And you can take a look at them if you want. We'll just scroll down through them, but you'll see things like multi-poly, nearest value, poly from text, etc. So these all sound like GIS kind of terms, and of course they are. And we'll also look at tables. And now we see we have one table in here. Now we'll add a bunch of other tables when we add our data. That's going to be in the next lesson. But PostGIS automatically installs one table. And that's the Spatial Reference System table. And we can see what columns that table has, what constraints and indexes, rules, triggers, etc. that are associated with that table. And what this table does is this holds all the spatial reference ID data. And so we can see it by typing another SQL statement. It's going to say select star from, and then the name of the table. And that star is just a shorthand for all of the fields in the table. And then I'm going to execute this SQL query. And this shows us all of the coordinate reference systems that we can use and their SRID number. So we'll explain this a little bit more later on in the course, but again, if you're advanced enough in GIS to be taking this class in spatial database, you should understand what a spatial reference is. And these are the choices that are available to us. And if we go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that there's over 5,000 coordinate reference systems that are available in PostGIS. So thanks a lot for listening. The next lecture is going to be a lecture from another course that I have on QGIS. And it's going to show us how to install QGIS. And once QGIS is installed, we'll come back and show you how to load our spatial data into QGIS. and we'll see you then.